Imagine a world defined by endless grasslands, brutal winters, and constant tribal warfare, where survival was a daily struggle and mercy a rare commodity. It was into this unforgiving landscape, sometime in the mid-12th century, that a boy named Temujin was born. His early life was a crucible of hardship, betrayal, and relentless danger. Experiences that would forge the relentless will and iron discipline of the man who would one day be known as Genghis Khan. Hello, and a very warm welcome to our nighttime history journey. It's great to have you with us as we settle in for the long night ahead. If you enjoy this kind of deep, immersive storytelling, please take a quick moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly helps us create more content like this for you. And for our algorithm question tonight, we'd love to know what time it is where you are listening from. Drop a comment below and let us know if it's evening, late night, or the early hours of the morning. Now, let's begin our story. To understand the man, you must first understand his world. Picture the Mongolian steppe, a vast, seemingly endless sea of grass under an enormous sky, a land of dramatic extremes. The winters were so brutal they could freeze rivers solid and kill livestock by the thousands. The summers were scorching hot, with dust storms that could blot out the sun. This was not a land for farmers. It was a land for nomads. People who lived in round, felt tents called gairs, people who followed their herds of horses, sheep, and goats across the plains, always searching for new pasture. Life was a constant, desperate struggle, and in this world there was no single nation, no king, no government. There were only tribes, clans, families, groups like the Tatars, the Merkits, the Karits, all constantly fighting each other. They would raid each other's camps, to steal horses, to steal resources, and to capture women. Alliances were made and broken in an instant. A friend one day could be a deadly enemy the next. The most sacred bond was the anda, or blood brother, but even that could be betrayed. It was a world governed by strength, cunning, and the brutal reality of survival. Into this chaos, a boy named Temujin was born, the son of a minor clan chieftain named Yasuge. His early years were relatively secure for the time. He had a family, a clan, and a future that seemed planned out, but that security was shattered in an instant. When Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was ambushed and poisoned by their longtime enemies, the Tatars. Yasuge's death was a catastrophe. According to the harsh laws of the steppe, his clan, the Taishad, saw no reason to support the family of a dead leader. They saw Yasuge's widow, Holen, and her young children not as family to be protected, but as mouths they no longer had to feed. So they did the unthinkable. They rode away, abandoning the family in the middle of the vast, empty steppe, leaving them to starve. Suddenly, Temujin, the son of a chief, was a complete outcast. His family was plunged into the deepest poverty. They survived by fishing in the rivers, by digging for roots, by hunting for marmots and mice. The constant, gnawing hunger became a part of his daily existence. This experience burned itself into his memory. He learned a powerful lesson. Without strength, without a loyal group around you, you are nothing. You are prey. This desperation even led to a terrible tragedy within his own family. His older half-brother, Begter, began to hoard food, keeping the best catches for himself, asserting his dominance over the younger children. For Temujin, this was the ultimate betrayal, a repeat of what his clan had done to them. In a cold, calculated act, he and his younger brother Crusader, stalked Begder and killed him with arrows. It was a brutal act, but in Temujin's world, it was about survival and establishing an order where the group, the family, came before the individual. It was his first harsh lesson in leadership. His struggles only grew worse. The Tayashad clan, who had abandoned him, now saw him as a future threat. A boy who survived against all odds might one day grow up to seek revenge. So they hunted him down. They captured him and locked his head and hands in a kang, a heavy wooden collar, humiliating him and marking him for a life of slavery or a sudden death. But even in chains, Temujin's mind was working. He watched, he waited. During a festival, when his guard was drunk and distracted, he saw his chance. He swung the heavy wooden collar with all his might, knocking the guard unconscious. He fled, plunging into a nearby river, hiding for hours with just his nostrils above the water's surface as his pursuers searched the banks just feet away. He was saved by a stranger from another clan, a man who saw a spark of something extraordinary in the desperate boy's eyes and chose to help him escape. These moments, the poisoning of his father, the betrayal of his clan, the gnawing hunger, the murder of his brother, the humiliation of captivity, and the daring escape. They were not just painful memories, they were the fire that forged his character. He developed an obsession with loyalty. He understood, better than anyone, the chaos that came from betrayal and disunity. And deep inside, a powerful ambition began to grow, to build something that could never be broken. A group so loyal, a nation so strong that no family would ever be abandoned on the steppe again. From the absolute depths of despair, he began the slow climb back. He found his promised bride, Bert, and her family honored the old engagement. Her dowry, a single, beautiful black sable cloak, was the only thing of value he owned in the entire world. But he didn't use it for warmth. He used it as a tool. He traveled to the camp of Togrul Khan, a powerful leader of the Karat tribe and his late father's blood brother. He presented the magnificent cloak as a gift, a gesture that reawakened the old alliance. At the same time, he reconnected with a childhood friend, another charismatic young warrior named Jamuka. They swore the oath of Anda, becoming blood brothers, and for a time they were inseparable. From a hunted orphan with nothing, Temujin now had a wife, a powerful ally, and a loyal blood brother. The first pieces were being placed on the board. The journey from a hunted outcast to a leader of men was just beginning. Temujin, hardened by a childhood of unimaginable struggle, was slowly, deliberately, beginning to unite the disparate fragments of the Mongol people. But far to the west, in the heart of the Islamic world, another remarkable leader was already emerging, born into a vastly different, yet equally turbulent, realm. How would the early life of Saladin, steeped in scholarship and piety, prepare him for his own monumental destiny? Our journey now takes us to the Fertile Crescent. Now, let us turn our gaze to a different world, one of ancient cities, vibrant scholarship, and the constant clash of civilizations. In the mid-12th century, the Islamic lands of the Middle East were fractured, facing a tenacious external threat, the Crusader kingdoms. It was into this complex tapestry that Yusuf ibn Ayyub, later known as Saladin, was born. His youth, marked by education and a more stable family background, would prepare him for a destiny as a unifier and defender of his faith. This was not the empty, windswept steppe. This was the cradle of civilization, a world of bustling cities like Damascus and Cairo, filled with libraries, mosques, and markets that teemed with goods from a dozen different lands. But politically, it was a fractured mosaic. The once mighty Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad was a mere spiritual figurehead with little real power. In Egypt, the wealthy but decaying Fatimid Caliphate was seen by many Sunni Muslims as heretical and weak. The real power lay with regional warlords and dynasties, like the Seljuk Turks and, most importantly, the rising Zengid dynasty in Syria. And pressed against the Mediterranean coast was a constant, painful reminder of this disunity: the Crusader states, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch. For decades, these European Christian kingdoms, established by the First Crusade, had been a thorn in the side of the Islamic world. They controlled holy sites, raided trade routes, and represented a deep wound to Muslim pride. Pious leaders and common people alike dreamed of a holy struggle, a jihad, to push them back into the sea and reclaim Jerusalem. The vibrant heartland of Islam was a mosaic of competing rulers, its unity fractured, and its holy sites under constant threat from the Crusader kingdoms. This was a land yearning for a unifying force, a champion to rise from within into this world. Yusuf ibn Ayyub was born. We know him as Saladin. His family were Kurds, renowned for their martial skill, and they were well connected. His father Ayyub and his uncle, a formidable general named Shirkuh, were key vassals of the most powerful Sunni ruler of the age, Nur ad-Din, the Zengid leader of Syria. So, unlike Temujin, Saladin was not born into poverty or abandonment. He had security, status, and opportunity. But the young Saladin showed little interest in following his uncle's military path. He was a quiet, studious, almost shy young man. He loved theology, memorizing the Quran, and studying law and poetry. His passion was for knowledge, not for the battlefield. You can just imagine him preferring the quiet shade of a library in Damascus to the dust and chaos of a military training ground. He was known for his gentle manners and his piety. If you had to guess his destiny, you would have said he was to become a scholar, a judge, or a religious teacher. Unlike the brutal education of the steppe, Saladin's youth was steeped in the rich traditions of Islamic scholarship and piety. He was a man of books and contemplation, seemingly destined for a life of learning, rather than the relentless demands of warfare and conquest. Yet, destiny called. The world of politics and war would not let him remain in the library. His uncle Shirkuh was Nur ad-Din's most trusted commander, and he needed his clever, reliable nephew by his side. Reluctantly at first, Saladin began to join his uncle's staff, serving the court of Nur ad-Din. He was given administrative tasks, learning how to manage logistics, supplies, and finances for a large army. He began to accompany Shirkuh on military expeditions, most importantly, on 3 campaigns into the rich and contested land of Egypt. He was not a natural warrior in the beginning. Some reports say he hated the military life and only went because his uncle commanded it. But he was a brilliant observer. On these campaigns, he saw strategy in action. He learned how to lead men, how to exploit an enemy's weakness, and how to navigate the treacherous politics of the Egyptian court. And he watched his master, Nur ad-Din. He saw how Nur ad-Din used his reputation for justice and piety to unite different factions under one banner, the banner of jihad against the Crusaders. Nur ad-Din became Saladin's role model, the blueprint for the kind of leader he would one day become. Yet, destiny called. Under the watchful eye of his formidable uncle Shirkuh and the pious leadership of Nur ad-Din, Saladin reluctantly began his apprenticeship in the arts of war and governance, slowly revealing a strategic brilliance and an unshakable devotion to the cause of Islam. From humble scholarly beginnings, Saladin was slowly rising within the powerful Zengid Empire, gaining experience in the complex political and military landscape of the Middle East. Meanwhile, far to the east, Temujin was still embroiled in the chaotic tribal feuds of the steppe, steadily, ruthlessly, consolidating his own power base. How would these two vastly different men, each driven by a unique vision, ultimately forge their respective paths to supreme leadership? Our story now returns to the steppe, where Temujin faces his first great test of power. From a scattered people, defined by constant internecine warfare, Temujin embarked on a ruthless and brilliant campaign to forge an unbreakable nation. This was not merely conquest, it was the meticulous construction of a unified identity, a disciplined military machine, and a codified legal system. This arduous process, spanning decades, would culminate in the birth of the Mongol Empire and the proclamation of its legendary founder, Genghis Khan. The path to unity was paved with blood and broken promises. Temujin had to eliminate every single rival who could challenge him. He turned first against his powerful Kirat ally, Togrul Khan, the man who had been like a second father to him, but who had ultimately betrayed him. Temujin crushed the Kirats in a decisive battle, absorbing their warriors into his own growing army. Then came the most painful break of all. His rivalry with his blood brother, Jamuka, had grown from a subtle tension into an open war. They were two sides of the same coin, both brilliant leaders, both charismatic, but with completely different philosophies. Jamuka believed in the old aristocratic order of the steppe, while Temujin believed in a new world, one based on merit and absolute loyalty to a single leader. They fought a bitter war that split the Mongol tribes down the middle. In the end, Temujin's vision proved more powerful. Jamuka was captured, his own men having betrayed him. When brought before Temujin, he asked for a noble's death won without spilling his blood. As was the tradition for high-born warriors, Temujin granted his old friend's request. Jamuka's back was broken, a grim end to a powerful friendship, and a clear signal that the old ways were over. One by one, he destroyed the great tribes. The Tatars, his father's murderers, were systematically annihilated. The powerful Naimans in the west were crushed. The Merkits, who had once stolen his wife Bert, were scattered to the winds. But Temujin's genius was not just in destruction, it was in creation. He had a revolutionary policy. He never wiped out the common people of a defeated tribe. Instead, he broke them up, scattering them among his own Mongol units. This shattered their old tribal identity and forced them to be loyal only to their new commander, and ultimately to Temujin himself. He promoted men based on their skill and loyalty, not their family name. A shepherd could become a general if he was brave and capable. This created an army bound by fierce personal loyalty to him. Temujin's rise was marked by both cunning and cruelty. He systematically dismantled the old tribal structures, replacing shifting allegiances with an unbreakable bond of loyalty directed solely towards himself, forging a nation from the ashes of ancient feuds. And what an army it was! Under Temujin, the chaotic Mongol horde transformed into the most disciplined and effective military machine on the planet. He organized his entire force using a decimal system. Every warrior was part of a 10-man squad called an arban. If one man in that squad retreated without orders, all 10 were executed. 10 of these squads formed a 100-man company, 10 companies formed a 1,000-man regiment, and 10 regiments formed a Tumana division of 10,000 warriors, a force of terrifying power and precision. Their strength was speed. Every Mongol warrior had a string of 3 or 4 horses, allowing them to switch mounts and cover 100 miles a day without tiring. They could appear out of nowhere, strike, and vanish before an enemy could even react. Their signature tactic was the feigned retreat. They would charge, then pretend to break and flee, luring their enemies into a chaotic, overconfident pursuit. Then, at a signal, they would turn in their saddles, unleashing a storm of arrows, while other Mongol units appeared on the flanks, encircling and annihilating the trapped and disordered foe. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Under Temujin, the Mongol army transformed into an unstoppable force. His ingenious organization, iron discipline, and mastery of cavalry tactics created a mobile, terrifying war machine that would soon sweep across continents, unmatched in its ferocity and effectiveness. But Temujin knew an army was not enough to hold a people together. You needed law, so he created the Yasa, a great code of laws for his new nation. Much of it was harsh, the death penalty for theft, adultery, spying, or desertion. But it also contained revolutionary ideas for the time. It guaranteed absolute freedom of religion. It protected ambassadors and envoys. It established a postal relay system across the land. It was a law that applied to everyone, from the highest noble to the lowest commoner, and it placed the good of the nation above the old traditions of the tribes. Beyond the battlefield, Temujin established the Yasa, a comprehensive legal code that bound his disparate people together, transcending tribal custom and laying the foundation for a unified state. It was a testament to his vision of order in a world of chaos. Finally, in the year 1206, the work was done. All the tribes of the Mongolian plateau were united under his banner. He called a great assembly, a Kurultai, on the banks of the Anan River. There, amidst thousands of warriors and their families, the great shaman of the Mongols rose and gave him a new title. He was no longer just Temujin. He was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, the chieftain of all the peoples who lived in felt-walled tents. In 1206, amidst the vastness of the steppe, Temujin, the hunted orphan, was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The scattered tribes were now one, bound by an unbreakable will, ready to cast their formidable shadow across the known world. Genghis Khan had forged an empire of unparalleled unity and military might. But far from the steppe, in the cradle of Islamic civilization, Saladin was also on a path of unification, albeit through different means and for different ends. How would the pious scholar become the unifier of the Islamic world and the formidable foe of the Crusaders? Our next chapter chronicles Saladin's rise to absolute power. While Genghis Khan carved his empire through relentless conquest, Saladin's ascent was a masterclass in political maneuvering, strategic patience, and profound religious devotion. From a subordinate position, he would meticulously consolidate power, piece by piece, across Egypt and Syria, driven by a singular, overarching purpose: to unite the fractured Muslim world and reclaim its holiest sites from the Crusader invaders. His great opportunity came unexpectedly. During the final campaign in Egypt, his uncle, the great General finally succeeded in taking control of the country and was appointed vizier, the chief minister, to the Fatimid Caliph. But just 2 months later, Shirkuh, a man who loved feasting, died suddenly. The Fatimid court, believing the quiet and bookish Saladin would be an easily manipulated puppet, appointed him as the new vizier. It was a fatal miscalculation. Saladin was no one's puppet. He began to work quietly, patiently, and brilliantly. He placed his own loyal family members in key administrative and military positions. He used the immense wealth of Egypt, the richest province in the entire Islamic world, to build up his own loyal army. He cultivated a reputation among the people for being just, generous, and deeply pious. He was slowly, methodically, hollowing out the power of the Fatimid dynasty from within. Then, when the moment was right, he made his move. It wasn't with an army or a bloody coup. He simply instructed the imams in the mosques of Cairo to deliver the Friday sermon in the name of the Sunni Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, not the Shia Fatimid Caliph. Just like that, the Fatimid Caliphate, which had ruled Egypt for 2 centuries, simply ceased to exist. In the heart of Egypt, Saladin began his true rise. From the position of vizier, he deftly dismantled the decaying Fatimid Caliphate, establishing Sunni rule and transforming Egypt's vast resources into the foundation of his own burgeoning power. Then, in the year 1174, his former master, the great Nur ad-Din, died in Syria. This created a massive power vacuum. Nur ad-Din's empire was left to his young 11-year-old son, and his various governors and emirs immediately began to squabble amongst themselves for power. For Saladin, this was a moment of decision. He was still, technically, a servant of the Zengid dynasty, but he saw the disunity as a disaster for his ultimate goal. How could they fight the Crusaders if they were fighting each other? He made his choice. Portraying himself as the true heir to Nur ad-Din's pious mission, he crossed into Syria. He did not come as a reckless conqueror, but as a reluctant unifier. He used a masterful blend of tactics. He would try diplomacy first. If that failed, he would lay siege to a city, cutting it off until it surrendered. He avoided, whenever possible, fighting pitched battles against fellow Muslims. He took the great city of Damascus without a fight, welcomed by a population that admired his reputation for justice. Slowly, city by city, he brought Syria under his control, always arguing that he was doing it for the greater cause of Islam. The death of his former master, Nur ad-Din, opened a new chapter for Saladin. He embarked on a patient campaign to unify Syria and Egypt, using a blend of military prowess and shrewd diplomacy to bring disparate Muslim lands under his banner, all in preparation for the greater struggle. With his control now stretching from North Africa to Mesopotamia, he solidified his power by establishing the Ayyubid dynasty. He appointed his most trusted brothers, sons, and nephews as governors of his new territories, ensuring loyalty and a stable administration. But unlike many rulers, personal power and wealth were not his final goals. They were merely the tools. Everything he did, every political maneuver, every military campaign, was aimed at one singular, unwavering vision: the holy war against the Crusader states and the liberation of Jerusalem. This sacred quest gave his rule a higher purpose. It inspired his soldiers. It won him the support of the people, and it was the glue that held his vast, diverse empire together. With his control firmly established across Egypt and Syria, Saladin founded the Ayyubid dynasty. His reign, however, was dedicated to a singular, unifying vision: the liberation of Jerusalem, a sacred quest that would inspire his people and propel him towards his ultimate confrontation with the Crusader forces. Saladin, the pious unifier, had consolidated a vast empire stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. meticulously preparing for the holy war against the Crusader states. Meanwhile, thousands of miles to the east, Genghis Khan, the ambitious nomad, was already looking beyond his newly unified steppe. How would these two monumental leaders bring their vast, distinct empires into their respective spheres of influence, and what grand conquests would define their reigns? Our story now follows the Mongol storm as it breaks upon the civilized world. With their respective power bases consolidated, both Genghis Khan and Saladin turned their formidable attention outwards. For Genghis, it was the rich, settled empires to the south. For Saladin, the entrenched Crusader kingdoms in his midst. These initial imperial ventures would showcase their distinct military geniuses and lay the groundwork for the vast realms they would eventually command. Genghis Khan, now master of the steppe, did not rest. The nomads needed plunder to survive and to reward the loyalty of the warriors who had flocked to his banner. He turned his gaze south, towards the wealthy, sophisticated kingdoms that bordered his new empire. His first target was the Tangut Kingdom of Western Shia, a rich state that controlled vital sections of the Silk Road. For the Mongols, this was a new kind of war. They were masters of the open field, but here they faced something new: massive, fortified cities with high walls and deep moats. At first, they were baffled. Their cavalry was useless against stone fortifications, but Genghis Khan was a master of adaptation. His solution was simple and brutal. In the lands they conquered, they would identify and capture engineers, craftsmen, and anyone with knowledge of siege warfare. These captives were then forced to build the very machines, the catapults, the siege towers, the battering rams that would be used to tear down the walls of their own cities. If they refused, they were killed. If they worked well, they were rewarded and incorporated into the ever-growing Mongol machine. He also perfected the use of terror as a weapon. He would offer a city the chance to surrender. If it did, it would be spared. If it resisted, the Mongols would unleash hell. Once the city fell, the population would be systematically massacred, with only the useful artisans and young women spared. The message was clear, and it spread like fire. Resistance is death. Surrender is survival. Genghis Khan's early imperial campaigns were a clash of nomadic might against ancient, fortified empires. He learned, adapted, and relentlessly pressed his advantage, using both unparalleled mobility and terrifying ferocity to breach the walls of seemingly impenetrable cities, demonstrating the adaptability of his formidable war machine. While the Mongol storm was breaking over China, Saladin was playing a different game. His unification of Egypt and Syria was complete. Now, he turned his full attention to the mission that had defined his life: the jihad against the Crusader states. But he was patient. He was a master strategist, not a reckless warlord. He knew the Crusaders, though divided, were still powerful, protected by a network of massive castles. So, he began a war of attrition. He launched raids into Crusader territory, burning their crops, stealing their livestock, and disrupting their trade. He engaged in smaller battles and skirmishes, always testing their defenses, always chipping away at their strength and their will to fight. He was slowly, methodically, tightening the noose. He was waiting for them to make a mistake. He knew their internal politics were a mess, with factions arguing over strategy and succession. He simply had to wait for the right moment, for a single act of aggression from the Crusaders that would give him the justification he needed to launch an all-out war. Saladin, the unifier, now turned his full attention to the Crusader threat. He embarked on a strategic campaign, slowly encircling and weakening the Christian strongholds, meticulously preparing for the grand confrontation that would define his legacy and reclaim the heart of the Islamic world. That moment came in 1187. A reckless and arrogant Crusader lord, Reynold of Chatillon, attacked a peaceful Muslim caravan, violating a truce. For Saladin, this was the final provocation. He declared the Holy War and assembled the largest army the Muslim world had seen in generations. He laid siege to the Crusader city of Tiberias, knowing the main Crusader army would have to march to relieve it. This was his trap. The Crusader army, led by the King of Jerusalem, Guy of Lusignan, marched out into the desert in the blistering heat of July. Saladin's light cavalry harassed them the entire way, darting in to fire arrows and then vanishing, denying them access to water. By the time the exhausted, dehydrated Christian knights reached the hills near the village of Hattin, they were already half defeated. Saladin had positioned his forces to block their path to the Sea of Galilee, the only source of water for miles. He set fire to the dry grass, and the smoke and heat added to the Crusaders' misery. The next morning, trapped, thirsty, and demoralized, the Crusader army was annihilated. The fateful Battle of Hattin marked the pinnacle of Saladin's strategic genius. Under the searing sun, he outmaneuvered and utterly crushed the main Crusader army, a decisive victory that shattered their power and opened the road to Jerusalem, a triumph that resonated across the Muslim world. With Hattin, Saladin had broken the back of the Crusader states, his eyes now firmly set on the liberation of Jerusalem. Genghis Khan, meanwhile, continued to consolidate his vast eastern domains, poised for even greater ventures further west. How would the fall of the Holy City define Saladin's reign? And what grand conquest would next capture Genghis Khan's relentless ambition? Our story follows both titans as they reach the peak of their power. With the Crusader armies decimated at Hattin, the path lay open to the holiest city in the Levant. For nearly a century, Jerusalem, the third holiest site in Islam, had been in Crusader hands. Now, Saladin, the unifier, stood at its gates, poised to achieve the crowning glory of his reign. But unlike previous conquests, this one would be marked not by bloodthirsty vengeance, but by a remarkable act of mercy and strategic foresight, forever cementing his place in history. The memory of the year 1099 was a deep and painful scar on the psyche of the entire Muslim world. When the knights of the First Crusade had taken Jerusalem, they had unleashed a horrific massacre, slaughtering Muslims and Jews in the streets and in their holy places. The blood, it was said, ran ankle-deep. Saladin was determined that his reclamation of the city would not be a mirror image of that horror. He approached the walls of Jerusalem and, through his envoys, offered generous terms of surrender to the city's Christian defenders. "Leave peacefully," he told them, "and you will be unharmed." But the defenders, led by the noble Balian of Ibelin, were filled with a desperate courage and refused. The siege began. Saladin's army brought up their mangonels and catapults, hurling massive stones against the ancient walls. His engineers directed sappers to dig tunnels beneath the fortifications, trying to collapse them from below. For days, the fighting was intense, the defense was heroic, but the outcome was inevitable. As a section of the wall began to crumble, the defenders knew they were lost. The memory of the First Crusade's bloody conquest of Jerusalem still haunted the Muslim world. Now Saladin stood before its walls, not as a vengeful conqueror, but as a liberator, offering terms yet prepared to fight with every fiber of his being to reclaim the holy city. But what followed was an act that would become legendary. Saladin forbade any killing or looting. There would be no revenge. Instead, he decreed that the inhabitants could purchase their freedom for a modest ransom: 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, and 1 for a child. Those who could pay were allowed to gather their belongings and march out of the city, completely unharmed, to the Christian-held port of Tyre. What happened next was even more remarkable. Saladin was overcome with compassion for the thousands who were too poor to afford the ransom. He saw the weeping families, the widows, the orphans. He and his brother, Aladil, used their own personal fortunes to pay the ransom for thousands of the poorest citizens, setting them free. He allowed the elderly to leave without any payment at all. He ensured that the city's most important Christian shrine, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was protected, and that Christian pilgrims would still be allowed to visit it. It was an act of chivalry that astonished both friends and foes, and illuminated the nobility of his character. The news of Jerusalem's fall sent shockwaves of joy across the Islamic world. From Cairo to Baghdad, there was celebration. For the first time in 88 years, the call to prayer echoed from the minarets of Jerusalem. Saladin was no longer just a sultan. He was the hero of his age, the embodiment of the ideal Muslim leader: pious, just, brave, and merciful. The liberation of Jerusalem sent ripples of joy and triumph throughout the Islamic world, cementing Saladin's reputation as the greatest champion of his faith. But this monumental victory would inevitably provoke a powerful response from the Christian West, far away. Genghis Khan was still extending his empire eastward, unaware of the echoes of Saladin's triumph. Our next chapter anticipates the arrival of the Lionheart. While Saladin was carefully navigating the delicate politics of the Middle East, far to the east, Genghis Khan unleashed his thunderous war machine upon a vast and powerful Islamic empire, Khwarezmia. What began as a diplomatic incident escalated into a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality. Empire was a titan of the Islamic world. It was huge, stretching across modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Its cities, like Samarkand and Bukhara, were jewels of the Silk Road, famed for their wealth, their mosques, and their centers of learning. Initially, Genghis Khan had no desire to conquer Khwarezmia. He saw it as a potential trading partner. He sent a huge caravan of 500 merchants and envoys, seeking to establish diplomatic and commercial ties. But when the caravan reached the Khwarezmian frontier city of Otrar, the local governor, a relative of the Shah, grew greedy. He accused the merchants of being spies, had them all executed, and seized their valuable goods. When news of this reached Genghis Khan, he was enraged, but he controlled his anger. He sent a second delegation, 3 ambassadors, directly to the Shah. He demanded that the governor of Otrar be handed over to him for punishment. The Shah's response was one of supreme arrogance. He had one of the Mongol ambassadors killed. Then he had the beards of the other 2 shaved off, a sign of deep humiliation, and sent them back to Genghis Khan. The Khwarezmian Empire, vast and confident, made a fatal error. Their ruler's arrogant dismissal and brutal murder of Genghis Khan's envoys ignited the wrath of the Mongol universal ruler, setting in motion a cascade of events that would consume their empire in fire and blood. The Shah expected the Mongols to attack from one direction, through the Jungarian Gate, the traditional invasion route. He positioned his main army there, ready to crush them. But Genghis Khan was not a traditional commander. He led them across the forbidding Kizil-Kum desert, considered impassable, and appeared suddenly in the Khwarezmian heartland, deep behind their lines. The Shah was completely outmaneuvered. Mongol armies seemed to be everywhere at once. His forces were cut off from each other, unable to concentrate, unable to communicate. The Mongol cavalry, swift and relentless, surrounded his armies one by one. Genghis Khan, with an army that moved like the wind, employed sophisticated feints and overwhelming encirclements, systematically dismantling the Khwarezmian defenses and sowing panic wherever they rode. What followed was a campaign of annihilation. The city of Otrar, where the incident began, was besieged and taken. The Mongols destroyed the intricate canal systems that had supported the region's agriculture for centuries, turning fertile farmland back into desert. At cities like Merv and Reshaped, the slaughter was almost total, with reports of over 1 million people killed in each. The Shah himself fled, a hunted man, relentlessly pursued across his own crumbling empire by two of Genghis Khan's greatest generals, Jib and Subutai. He finally died of illness on a small, lonely island in the Caspian Sea, a powerless fugitive. City after city crumbled under the Mongol onslaught, leaving behind only ruins and the echoes of cries. Khan's unyielding determination to punish insult and establish his unchallenged dominion over the vast lands to his west. The Khwarezmian Empire had been shattered, a chilling warning to all who dared defy the universal ruler. Genghis Khan's empire now stretched vast distances, a formidable power driven by relentless expansion. But far away. Our next chapter brings us to the dramatic clash of titans in the Third Crusade. The fall of Jerusalem to Saladin ignited a furious response across Christian Europe. 3 of the most powerful monarchs of the age answered the call for a new crusade: Frederick Barbarossa, Philip Augustus, and the legendary Richard I, the Lionheart. What followed was a brutal, years-long struggle, a clash of wills and military genius that would test Saladin's consolidated empire to its very limits and etch the names of these 2 great commanders into the annals of chivalry and warfare. This was not a small raiding party. This was the collective might of Western Europe, coming to take back the Holy Land. The first to set out was the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, with a massive German army. But his crusade ended in tragedy when the elderly emperor drowned while crossing a river in Anatolia. His army fell apart. Next came the King of France, Philip Augustus, and King Richard I of England, arriving by sea. They were bitter rivals, but for now they were united against a common enemy. Of the 2, it was Richard who was the true warrior. He was a giant of a man, a brilliant tactician, a fearless fighter, and utterly ruthless. His reputation preceded him. From the shores of Europe came a new wave of Christian might, led by the legendary Richard the Lionheart. His very name struck fear, and his arrival signaled a renewed, desperate struggle for the Holy Land, a direct challenge to Saladin's hard-won victories. The first major target was the strategic port city of Acre. It had been under siege by local Crusader forces for 2 long, miserable years, with Saladin's army on the outside trying to break the siege. It was a brutal stalemate. The arrival of Richard and the French army tipped the balance. Richard's energy and tactical skill reinvigorated the Christian forces. They brought massive siege engines and began to pound the city's walls relentlessly. Finally, in the summer of 1191, after immense casualties on both sides, the Muslim defenders of Acre surrendered. And then Richard the Lionheart committed an act that would define his crusade. As part of the surrender terms, Saladin was to pay a large ransom and release Christian prisoners. But when a deadline was missed, Richard lost his patience. In a cold, calculated act of brutality, he ordered nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners, men, women, and children, to be marched out of the city and publicly executed in full view of Saladin's horrified army. It was a shocking act of cruelty, a stark and deliberate contrast to Saladin's mercy at Jerusalem. The siege of Acre was a grinding, bloody stalemate, testing the endurance of both Muslim and Crusader. Its bitter end saw a chilling act of ruthlessness from Richard, a massacre that shocked the Islamic world and fueled the fires of vengeance in Saladin's ranks. After the fall of Acre, King Philip of France, having had enough of the crusade and his rivalry with Richard, went home. Now, Richard was in sole command. He began a long march down the coast, his goal the city of Jaffa, the next step on the road to Jerusalem. Saladin's army shadowed him the entire way. His light cavalry endlessly harassed Richard's disciplined marching column, darting in to fire arrows and then galloping away. But Richard's command was superb, and his knights held firm. Finally, near the town of Arsuf, Saladin saw an opportunity and launched a full-scale attack. The battle was ferocious. For hours, Richard's knights held their ground under a hail of arrows and repeated charges. Then, at the perfect moment, Richard unleashed his own devastating charge of heavily armored knights. The shock was overwhelming. Saladin's line broke, and his army was forced to retreat. It was a major tactical victory for Richard, proving he could defeat Saladin in an open battle, but it was not a decisive one. Saladin's army was bloodied, but not broken. He retreated in good order, and the war continued. Richard's tactical brilliance shone on the field of Arsuf, yet Saladin remained an elusive and formidable foe, employing Fabian tactics to exhaust the Crusaders. The war became a grinding test of endurance, a relentless push and pull for control of the coast, with the ultimate prize of Jerusalem still tantalizingly out of reach. The Third Crusade had proven to be a monumental struggle, a testament to the military prowess of both Richard and Saladin, yet neither could decisively defeat the other. As the years wore on, weariness set in on both sides. Far to the east, Genghis Khan was now consolidating his vast domains and looking towards the distant lands of Russia and Eastern Europe. How would the great Saladin's reign ultimately conclude? And what lasting impact would his chivalry and military genius have on the course of his world? Our story now turns to the final days of the Eagle of Islam. With Khwarezmia utterly subdued, Genghis Khan's gaze continued its relentless westward trajectory. The Mongol war machine, now honed to perfection, pushed into Persia and beyond, encountering new challenges and absorbing vast territories. This period not only showcased his unparalleled military genius, but also his burgeoning vision for a unified, interconnected empire, bridging east and west through trade and conquest. The initial conquest of Khwarezmia was just the beginning. The Mongol armies, seemingly tireless, now pushed deeper into what is modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and the Caucasus Mountains. Here, they faced new kinds of challenges: mountain kingdoms, like Georgia, with fierce warriors who knew how to use the terrain to their advantage. But it didn't matter. The Mongol machine adapted, overcame, and conquered. And it was during this time that Genghis Khan unleashed his two greatest generals, Geb and Subutai, on one of the most astonishing military campaigns in history. With just 20,000 men, he sent them on what was supposed to be a mission to hunt down the fugitive Khwarezmian Shah. But after the Shah's death, their mission expanded. They continued west on a great reconnaissance in force. They circled the entire Caspian Sea, smashing every army sent against them. They fought their way through the Caucasus Mountains, defeated the Georgians, destroyed a powerful army of the Cumans on the plains of Russia, and rode as far as the trading posts of Genoa in the Crimea. It was a journey of thousands of miles through unknown territory, a scouting mission that gathered priceless intelligence for future invasions of Russia and Europe. From the scorched earth of Khwarezmia, the Mongol tide surged into Persia and beyond, pushing the boundaries of their growing empire. Generals like Geb and Subutai embarked on daring expeditions that reached the very edges of Eastern Europe, scouting future battlegrounds for the relentless Khan. It's easy to see the Mongols as only destroyers, and the initial conquest was always unbelievably brutal. But behind the violence, Genghis Khan had a vision. Once a territory was conquered and the resistance crushed, a new order was put in place. Historians call it the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Under the iron rule of the Khan, the roads became safe. The Great Silk Road, which had been dangerous and fragmented for centuries, was now unified and protected. A merchant could travel from one end of the Mongol Empire to the other with a single passport, completely secure. Genghis Khan also established a policy of almost total religious freedom. He didn't care if you were a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or a Jew, as long as you obeyed his laws and paid your taxes. He understood that persecuting people for their beliefs was a foolish way to start rebellions. His great law, the Yasa, was applied everywhere, creating a predictable legal system across a vast swath of the earth. Even amidst conquest, Genghis Khan laid the seeds of a revolutionary vision, the Pax Mongolica. Under his formidable sway, vast trade routes flourished, religions were often tolerated, and a unified legal system brought an unprecedented degree of order across the immense territories he controlled. The Mongols were also not just destroyers, they were brilliant students. They were a nomadic people with no cities of their own, no written language at first, and simple technology. But they were incredibly pragmatic. When they conquered a city and found engineers who knew how to build better catapults, they didn't kill them, they put them to work. They captured scribes and administrators and learned how to run a complex, settled empire. They took the best ideas, the best technologies, and the most talented people from every culture they conquered and incorporated them into their own system. It was this ability to learn and adapt that made their empire not just vast, but also surprisingly durable. The Mongols were not just destroyers. They were shrewd learners. They absorbed knowledge and technology from the sophisticated cultures they conquered, from advanced siegecraft to administrative techniques, incorporating these new tools to further expand and consolidate their colossal empire. Genghis Khan had built an empire of unprecedented scale, stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian. His vision was not merely conquest, but the creation of a vast, interconnected realm under Mongol law. But as he looked towards further expansion, his own life was drawing to a close. How would the great conqueror meet his end, and what challenges would his vast, fragmented empire face after his passing? Our next chapter explores the twilight of the universal ruler. After years of relentless warfare against the formidable Richard the Lionheart, weariness settled upon the great Saladin. His life had been a testament to tireless devotion, strategic brilliance, and profound piety. But even the eagle of Islam was not immortal. His passing would mark the end of an era, leaving behind a legacy of unity, chivalry, and a profound impact on the relationship between the Muslim world and the West. The long, brutal war had taken its toll on both sides. Richard the Lionheart, for all his tactical victories, had never been able to march on Jerusalem. His supply lines were stretched thin, his army was exhausted, and news from England demanded his return. Saladin, for his part, had successfully defended Jerusalem, but his treasury was empty, and his emirs were weary of the constant fighting. Neither man could truly defeat the other, and so the two great adversaries, who had never met face to face but had developed a strange, chivalrous respect for one another, decided to make peace. In September of 1192, they signed the Treaty of Jaffa. The terms were a pragmatic compromise. The coast, from Tyre down to Jaffa, would remain in Crusader hands, but Jerusalem, the ultimate prize, would remain under Muslim rule. However, Saladin, in a gesture of goodwill, guaranteed that unarmed Christian pilgrims would be allowed to safely enter the city and visit their holy sites. With the treaty signed, Richard the Lionheart and his army sailed for home. The Third Crusade was over. The long, grueling Third Crusade ended not with a decisive victory, but with a weary truce. Both Saladin and Richard, exhausted by years of battle, recognized the limits of their power, establishing a fragile peace that allowed Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem, while the Holy City remained under Islamic rule. Of endless stress and responsibility had finally caught up with him. He was tired, his health began to fail. He fell ill with a fever, and it quickly became clear that he would not recover. As he lay dying, he seemed to have no concern for his own power or wealth. He had spent his entire life fighting for a cause, not for personal gain. The great Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the ruler of a vast empire, had almost nothing to his name. He had given nearly everything he ever earned away to the poor, to his soldiers, or to fund his campaigns. He left behind just a handful of coins, not even enough to pay for his own funeral. His passing, on March 4th, 1193, was peaceful, and when the news spread, a wave of profound grief washed over the entire Islamic world. His passing, leaving behind little personal fortune but immense spiritual wealth, was mourned throughout the Muslim world, a testament to his profound impact and beloved character. But Saladin's work endured. He left behind the Ayyubid dynasty, with his sons and brothers ruling over the empire he had built, holding the line against future crusades and maintaining Sunni orthodoxy in the heart of the Middle East. More than that, he left behind an idea. He became the symbol of the ideal Muslim ruler, a man who was both a brilliant warrior and a deeply pious servant of God, a man who could be both strong and merciful, a unifier who put the good of his people and his faith above all else. Saladin left behind not just a dynasty, but a powerful ideal of Islamic unity and chivalry, forever shaping the spiritual and political landscape of the Middle East. Saladin, the eagle of Islam, had passed, leaving a unified, revitalized Muslim world in his wake. His was a legacy of defense and consolidation. Far away, Genghis Khan, the unifier of the steppe, was still expanding his colossal empire, unaware that his own life, too, would soon draw to a close. Our next chapter explores the twilight of Genghis Khan and the succession of his vast dominion. Even the most unstoppable forces eventually find their limit. After decades of relentless conquest, having united the Mongols and carved out an empire stretching across Asia, Genghis Khan's own life was drawing to a close. His final campaigns, driven by a desire for complete dominion, would push his war machine to its farthest limits before he was not a man to leave a job unfinished. The Tangut Kingdom of Western Shia, his first major conquest, had betrayed him, refusing to send troops for his war against Khwarezmia. For Genghis Khan, this was an unforgivable act of rebellion. This was not the swift, open warfare of his youth. This was a slow, grinding siege war against powerful, fortified empires. But his mind was as sharp as ever. He directed complex operations, oversaw the construction of massive siege works, and planned his strategies with the same brilliance that had brought him from an outcast orphan to the master of half the world. Though his empire stretched across continents, Genghis Khan remained focused on completing his conquests. His final campaigns in the East were a testament to his enduring strategic genius. As he sought to bring the powerful Eastern empires fully under the Mongol heel, battling even as his own strength began to wane. How could this colossal empire, the largest the world had ever seen, possibly survive without him? He knew military might wasn't enough. He reinforced the power of his great law, the Yasa, ensuring it was the binding force for all his people, from the highest general to the lowest herdsman. And he perfected his greatest administrative innovation, the yam. This was a remarkable postal relay system. A network of stations was set up across the empire, each stocked with fresh horses and supplies. It was the internet of its time, allowing the Khan to send orders and receive intelligence from the farthest corners of his realm with incredible speed. He also had to decide who would succeed him. He knew that one man alone could not rule it all. He decided to divide the empire into 4 great khanates, or ulus, one for each of his 4 sons from his first wife, Bert, Joki, Chagatai, Ogaday, and Tolui. They would each rule a vast territory, but all would be under the authority of a single great Khan, who the family would choose after his death. It was a plan born of pragmatism, an attempt to manage the unmanageable. Even as the shadow of his mortality lengthened, Genghis Khan remained focused on the longevity of his colossal creation. In the year 1227, during the final siege against the Western Shia, the end came. The exact cause of his death is still a mystery. Some sources say he died from injuries after falling from his horse during a hunt. Others say it was a sudden illness, a raging fever. But whatever the cause, in the middle of a military campaign, the universal ruler died. According to legend, his body was carried back to his homeland in a silent, solemn procession. Any person or animal that crossed the path of the funeral cortege was killed, to preserve the secret and to serve the Khan in the afterlife. His final burial place is the greatest secret of all. To this day, nobody knows where he is buried. He was laid to rest in an unmarked grave, and 1,000 horses were supposedly ridden over the site to erase any trace. Genghis Khan passed away, leaving behind a legacy of absolute power, but also the enduring enigma of his final resting place, a secret held by the very earth he had sought to conquer. Genghis Khan was gone, but the colossal empire he forged would continue its expansion under his successors, reaching even greater and more terrifying heights. Yet, the seeds of its eventual fragmentation were already sown. Meanwhile, Saladin's empire, too, faced the challenges of succession. How would the empires of these two titans grapple with the loss of their founding fathers, and what new directions would their vast realms take? Our next chapter explores the immediate challenges of succession. The passing of a great leader often leaves a void, testing the very foundations of the empire they built. For both Saladin and Genghis Khan, their deaths unleashed a new set of challenges for their successors. While Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty would face internal divisions, the Mongol Empire, under the golden family of Genghis Khan, would astonishingly continue its furious expansion, reaching a scale never before witnessed. In the lands that Saladin had so painstakingly united, his death was followed by a familiar pattern. Saladin was a unifier, but the empire he built was, in many ways, a personal and family-run enterprise. As was the custom in the region, his vast territories were divided up among his 17 sons and his trusted brother, Aladil. Almost immediately, the old rivalries and personal ambitions that Saladin's powerful personality had suppressed came rushing back to the surface. His sons and nephews began to squabble over cities and territory. The ruler of Egypt feuded with the ruler of Damascus. The ruler of Aleppo plotted against them both. The hard-won unity of the Islamic world began to crack. And yet, the legacy of Saladin was not entirely lost. While they fought amongst themselves, the Ayyubid princes still saw themselves as the defenders of Islam against the Crusader threat. The core of the empire, especially the powerhouse of Egypt, remained strong and under Ayyubid control. They would go on to repel future crusades, holding the line that Saladin had drawn. His empire had fractured, but it had not shattered. Saladin's carefully constructed empire, though unified by his charisma, quickly fractured upon his death. His sons and kinsmen, each claiming a share, entered into familiar squabbles, yet the core of the Ayyubid realm endured, holding firm against the continuing Crusader threat, a testament to the strong foundations he had laid. But on the vast steppes of Mongolia, a very different story was unfolding. Genghis Khan had foreseen the danger of succession. He had drilled into his sons the importance of unity, bound by the sacred law of the Yasa. After his death, the Mongol nobles and the Golden Family, his direct descendants, gathered for a great Kurultai to formally choose the next great Khan. There was debate and political maneuvering, but in the end, they honored the will of their founder. They elected his third son, Ogedei, the one Genghis himself had chosen for his generous and steady nature, as the second great Khan. And with that, the Mongol war machine did not slow down. It accelerated. Ogedei was a brilliant leader in his own right. He established a permanent capital at Karakoram, giving the nomadic empire a fixed center. And he embraced his father's vision of world conquest with a terrifying zeal. He ordered the final annihilation of the Jin dynasty in China, a war his father had started decades before. More importantly, he launched the Great Western Invasion. He sent a massive army under his nephew Batu and the legendary general Subutai with a simple order: conquer the lands of Russia and Europe. The Mongol succession, though fraught with potential for division, proved remarkably stable, with Ogedei Khan assuming the mantle of his father. Under his formidable leadership, the Mongol tide surged even further, extinguishing ancient empires and bringing lands previously untouched by conquest under their formidable dominion. Here you can see the two great philosophies of empire in sharp contrast. Saladin's Ayyubid Empire became a collection of regional family holdings, focused on defense and local governance. It was a more traditional Islamic dynasty. The Mongol Empire, at this stage, was something else entirely. It was a single, unified military corporation whose primary business was relentless, planned expansion. The Great Khan was the CEO, and his orders were carried out with brutal efficiency across a continent. The two empires, so different in their genesis, also diverged in their handling of succession. Where Saladin's legacy saw a family empire, the Mongols, for a crucial period, maintained an almost unbroken, centralized command, allowing their unprecedented expansion to continue unchecked. The immediate aftermath of their deaths saw their empires take diverging paths. The Ayyubids held their ground, while the Mongols expanded beyond all imagination, bringing their terrifying might to the very doorstep of Europe. What was the ultimate fate of these two great empires? And how would their respective impacts continue to resonate through the centuries? Our next chapter explores the further expansion and eventual decline of their respective dynasties. Even the most formidable empires are subject to the relentless currents of history. Though Saladin's legacy of unity persisted, the Ayyubid dynasty he founded gradually weakened. Grappling with internal divisions and the persistent Crusader threat, this slow decline would ultimately give way to a new power in Egypt and Syria, an elite military class known as the Mamluks, who would face a terrifying, unforeseen challenge. The arrival of Genghis Khan's formidable descendants, the departure of Richard the Lionheart, did not end the Crusades. Far from it. New waves of European knights continued to arrive on the shores of the Holy Land, determined to succeed where Richard had failed. Saladin's sons and nephews, the Ayyubid sultans, were forced into a state of almost constant warfare. They fought off the Fifth Crusade, which managed to capture the vital Egyptian port of Damietta for a time, before being driven back into the sea. They negotiated with the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who, in a bizarre turn of events, managed to gain control of Jerusalem through a treaty, only for it to be retaken by Ayyubid forces a few years later. Each new crusade, each new battle, drained the Ayyubid treasury and cost precious lives. Though Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands, the Crusader threat persisted, forcing the Ayyubid sultans into a tireless defense of their lands. Each new wave of Christian invasion tested the resilience of Saladin's heirs, draining resources and paving the way for internal changes. But the greatest threat to the Ayyubids was not from the outside, it was from within. The unity that Saladin had forged through sheer force of personality had dissolved into petty rivalries. The Ayyubid princes in Egypt, Damascus, and Aleppo constantly plotted against one another, weakening the empire from the inside out. To protect themselves, they relied more and more on their elite soldiers, the Mamluks. The Mamluks were a unique and powerful force. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were slave soldiers, mostly of Turkish origin, who were bought as young boys from the steppes of Central Asia. They were brought to Cairo, converted to Islam, and put through the most rigorous military training imaginable. They had no family ties, no loyalty to any tribe or clan. Their only loyalty was to the Sultan who owned them and to their Mamluk brotherhood. They were the most professional, disciplined, and formidable warriors in the entire Islamic world. And as the Ayyubid princes grew weaker, the Mamluks grew stronger. They were the real power behind the throne. Finally, in the year 1250, they decided to take the throne for themselves. In a swift and decisive coup, the Mamluk generals overthrew the last Ayyubid sultan in Egypt and established their own Mamluk sultanate Amidst the squabbling of Ayyubid princes, a new power quietly rose from within their own ranks, the Mamluk slave soldiers, loyal, disciplined, and formidable, transforming Egypt into a Mamluk sultanate, a new bastion of Islamic power. And they took power just in time, because a storm was gathering in the east, a storm far more terrible than any crusade. The Mongol hordes, led by Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, were on the march. They swept through Persia, destroying everything in their path, and in 1258 they arrived at the gates of Baghdad, the glorious capital of the Islamic world. For 500 years, the city fell, and the Mongols unleashed a massacre of almost unimaginable horror. They destroyed the great libraries, burned the palaces, and killed the last Abbasid caliph, the spiritual leader of Sunni Islam. The news sent a shockwave of terror across the entire Muslim world. It seemed that no one could stop them. The Islamic world, already fragmented, now faced an existential threat unlike any before it. From the east, the Mongol tide, the heirs of Genghis Khan, swept across Persia and Iraq, culminating in the devastating fall of Baghdad. The Mamluks, the inheritors of Saladin's realm, now stood alone, the last great hope against this overwhelming, terrifying force. The Ayyubid legacy had passed into the hands of the Mamluks, who now faced the most fearsome invaders the world had ever seen. The descendants of Genghis Khan, having conquered half the known world, were now on the cusp of entering Saladin's former domain. What would happen when these two colossal legacies, one of conquest, one of defense, finally collided on the battlefield? Our next chapter anticipates the epic clash at Anjalut. Even an empire built on conquest and iron will could not defy the forces of internal division forever. After an astonishing century of relentless expansion that reached from Korea to Hungary, the vast Mongol Empire, the unparalleled creation of Genghis Khan, began to fracture. The cohesive unity of the early Khans gave way to rivalries between powerful descendants, leading to the formation of separate khanates and a gradual dimming of the universal ruler's singular vision. For decades after Genghis Khan's death, the momentum seemed unstoppable. His son and successor Ogedei completed the brutal conquest of the Jin dynasty in China and launched the invasion of Russia, bringing the European kingdoms to their knees. After Ogedei, under the reign of great Khans like Monkey, the expansion continued. The Mongol armies, in a campaign that lasted for decades, finally conquered the mighty southern Song dynasty of China, a civilization far older and more populous than their own. At its peak, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. It stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube River, a single, unified power that controlled the lives of millions. For decades after Genghis Khan's death, his sons and grandsons continued his astonishing work. The Mongol banners swept further across Asia, absorbing more empires, and creating a unified dominion of unprecedented scale, an almost unimaginable testament to their founders' original vision. But the empire had grown too large. It was too diverse, too complex for one man to rule from a single capital in Mongolia. The breaking point came in 1259 with the death of Monkey Khan. His brothers, Kublai and Arik Bok, immediately began to fight a civil war over who would be the next great Khan. This conflict shattered the empire's unity forever. The vast dominion of Genghis Khan split apart, breaking into 4 huge, independent successor states, each ruled by a different branch of his family. In China, Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, becoming the Emperor of China. In the vast grasslands of Russia, the descendants of Genghis's son Joki ruled the Khanate of the Golden Horde. In the traditional heartland of Central Asia, there was the Chagatai Khanate, and in Persia and the Middle East, Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu established his own powerful empire. These new kingdoms were still Mongol, and they were still incredibly powerful. But they were no longer one. They often fought bitter wars against each other, their rivalries permanently ending the dream of a single world-spanning Mongol empire. The vast empire, too large to hold together under a single will, eventually splintered. From the colossal dominion of Genghis Khan emerged four powerful, yet often rivalrous, khanates, each ruling a vast portion of the conquered lands, but no longer united under a single, universal authority. It was this fourth kingdom, the Ilkhanate, that now posed the most direct threat to the lands once ruled by Saladin. Hulagu Khan, a man who shared his grandfather's ambition and ruthlessness, led his armies on a terrifying sweep to the west. He utterly destroyed the legendary mountain fortress of the Assassins in Persia. Then, as we heard, he laid siege to Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world, and subjected it to a week of horrific destruction. Now, his eyes were set on Syria and Egypt. His armies seemed invincible, a terrifying force of nature that no one could stop. In the west, the Ilkhanate, led by Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu, launched a terrifying new wave of conquest. Baghdad, the ancient seat of the caliphate, crumbled under their might, and their armies pushed ever further, seemingly destined to conquer the entire Islamic world, until they encountered the formidable Mamluks. The vast Mongol Empire, though fragmented, remained a force of unimaginable power, its Ilkhanate armies now bearing down on the lands once unified by Saladin. Only one power now stood in their path: the Mamluks, the inheritors of Saladin's military traditions. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the Middle East and mark the true limits of Mongol expansion. Our next chapter brings us to the pivotal battle of Jalut. For decades, the Mongol tide had seemed unstoppable, sweeping across continents, extinguishing empires, and leaving a trail of devastation. Now, their formidable Ilkhanate armies, the direct heirs of Genghis Khan, stood at the precipice of Egypt, poised to conquer the very heart of the Islamic world. But in their path stood a new, determined power: the Mamluks, hardened by years of defending Saladin's legacy. What ensued was a clash of titans at the Battle of Jalut, a momentous confrontation that would determine the fate of civilizations. The Mamluks were, in many ways, the perfect weapon to counter the Mongols. They were born of the same world. Like the Mongol warriors, many were born on the vast steppes of Central Asia and southern Russia. They were master horsemen from childhood. They were expert archers, skilled with the powerful composite bow. They were put through a brutal training regimen that prized discipline and loyalty above all else. But unlike the Mongols, their loyalty was not to a distant Khan, but to their military brotherhood and to the defense of their new home, Egypt. And now, they had a powerful motivation. They had heard the horror stories from Baghdad. They knew that surrender was not an option. They were fighting for the very survival of their faith and their kingdom. The Mamluks were a unique military force, forged in the crucible of service and steeped in the martial traditions of the region. Disciplined and utterly devoted, they knew that the fate of Islam and their very existence rested on their ability to halt the terrifying Mongol advance. The Mongol army, under Hulag's trusted Christian general, Kitbuka, poured into Syria. They took the great cities of Aleppo and Damascus with frightening ease. They sent an envoy to the Mamluk Sultan in Cairo, a man named Qutuz, with the standard Mongol demand: surrender or be destroyed. But Sultan Qutuz was no weakling. He and his most brilliant and ambitious general, a fierce warrior named Baybars, made a fateful decision. They would not wait to be besieged in their cities. They would not hide behind walls. They would march out and meet the most feared army on earth in open battle. It was an incredibly bold, almost suicidal gamble. The Mongols approached with their customary terrifying speed, leaving behind a trail of destruction. But the Mamluks, under the shrewd command of Sultan Qutuz and the brilliant general Baybars, would not shy from a direct confrontation. They were ready to stake everything on a single, decisive battle. On September 3, 1260, the two armies met in Palestine, in a valley called Ain Jalut, the Spring of Goliath. It was here that history would be made. The Mamluks had a brilliant plan. They would use the Mongols' own signature tactic against them. Sultan Qutuz hid the bulk of his army in the hills surrounding the valley. He sent a smaller force, led by the charismatic Baybars, forward to meet the Mongol vanguard. The battle began. Baybars and his Mamluks engaged the Mongols, fighting fiercely. Then, at a prearranged signal, Baybars did something extraordinary. He ordered his men to turn and flee. It was a feigned retreat, a perfect imitation of the Mongol tactic that had doomed countless armies. The Mongol general Kitbuka, seeing his enemy seemingly break and run, fell for the trap completely. He ordered his entire army forward in a triumphant, reckless charge, eager to annihilate the fleeing Mamluks. The Mongols poured into the valley in a disorganized pursuit, straight into the trap. At that moment, Sultan Qutuz gave the signal. From the hills on three sides, the main Mamluk army emerged, closing the mouth of the valley. The Mongols were trapped. The fighting was savage, a swirling, desperate melee of horsemen. But for the first time, the Mongols were the ones who were encircled, outnumbered, and caught on unfavorable ground. The Mamluk heavy cavalry smashed into their flanks. Kitbuka fought with incredible bravery, but it was hopeless. He was captured and killed. At Ain Jalut, the unstoppable Mongol tide finally met its match. The Mamluks, employing a brilliant strategy that even utilized Mongol tactics against them, fought with desperate ferocity. The clash was brutal, but when the dust settled, the Mongol general lay dead, and the seemingly invincible Mongol advance had been decisively halted. The victory at Ain Jalut was a pivotal moment, not just for the Mamluks, but for the entire Muslim world. It marked the definitive limit of Mongol expansion into the Middle East, a testament to the enduring military traditions of Saladin's successors. The direct military confrontation between the heirs of Genghis Khan and the inheritors of Saladin's legacy had occurred, and the outcome had reshaped history. In our final chapters, we will reflect on the profound, long-term legacies of these two titans, and how their distinct forms of power continue to echo through the ages. Centuries after his death, the name Genghis Khan still evokes images of unstoppable conquest and immense power, but his legacy stretches far beyond the battlefield. He was not just a destroyer, he was a paradoxical unifier, a force that reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Eurasia, inadvertently facilitating cultural exchange and laying the groundwork for a truly globalized world. What were the profound and often surprising long-term impacts of the universal ruler? The most immediate and surprising legacy was the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Once the initial brutal conquest was over, the lands under Mongol rule became incredibly safe. The Great Silk Road, for centuries a patchwork of dangerous territories controlled by warring tribes and greedy lords, was now a single, unified highway. A merchant, it was said, could travel from one end of the empire to the other with a bar of gold on his head and never be troubled. This security led to an explosion of trade and travel between East and West on a scale never seen before. People like Marco Polo could make their famous journey to China precisely because the Mongols guaranteed the safety of the roads. Beneath the formidable hand of Genghis Khan and his successors, the vast distances of Eurasia became interconnected. The Pax Mongolica ushered in an unprecedented era of safe travel and thriving trade along the Silk Road, unknowingly setting the stage for a new kind of global interaction, both beneficial and devastating. This great intercontinental highway carried more than just silk and spices. It carried ideas. It was the Mongol Empire that truly introduced Europe to the wonders of Chinese technology. Gunpowder, which would revolutionize warfare. The compass, which would revolutionize navigation. The printing press, which would revolutionize knowledge. The Mongols didn't invent these things, but their unified empire acted as a high-speed delivery system, accelerating the spread of ideas that would ultimately help trigger the European Renaissance. They were pragmatic rulers who recognized talent wherever they found it, moving engineers, doctors, artists, and administrators from one end of their empire to the other, creating a massive, unprecedented melting pot of culture and knowledge. The Mongol Empire, a crucible of diverse cultures, became an unexpected conduit for knowledge. Technologies and innovations, from the printing press to advanced mathematics, flowed across continents, enriching distant civilizations and reshaping the trajectory of human progress. Of course, the Mongol impact was not always positive. In Russia, the 2 centuries of rule by the Mongol Golden Horde, known as the Tatar Yoke, had a profound effect. It isolated Russia from the cultural developments happening in Western Europe, but it also forced the scattered Russian princes to unify, eventually centering their power around the city of Moscow, laying the groundwork for the modern Russian state. In the Islamic world, the initial destruction, especially of Baghdad, was a catastrophe from which the region never fully recovered. And yet, over time, the Mongol Ilkhans, who ruled Persia and Iraq, converted to Islam themselves. They became great patrons of the arts and sciences, leading to a new cultural flourishing that blended Persian and Mongol traditions. The Mongol conquests left an indelible mark on Russia, shaping its political development and sense of identity. In the Islamic world, the initial devastation gave way to new cultural syntheses and administrative structures, forever altering the course of these ancient lands. Genghis Khan's legacy is one of colossal scale and profound, often unintended, consequences. A force that violently reshaped the map, but also facilitated a new era of global connection. But what of Saladin, the unifier and defender? His impact, though geographically smaller, was equally profound, rooted in faith, justice, and an enduring ideal of chivalry. Our next chapter delves into the lasting and inspiring legacy of the Eagle of Islam. If Genghis Khan represents the raw power of conquest, Saladin stands as an enduring symbol of enlightened leadership, chivalry, and profound devotion. His legacy transcends military victories, resonating through centuries as an ideal of justice, piety, and strategic wisdom. What indelible mark did this remarkable sultan leave? And how does his image continue to inspire both within the Islamic world and beyond? For countless Muslims, Saladin became the perfect model of a leader. He was everything a ruler was supposed to be. He was deeply pious, beginning his days with prayer and study of the Quran. He was famously just, establishing courts where the poor and the powerful were treated equally. And he was incredibly generous. As we heard, he died with almost no personal wealth, having given it all away to charity and to the state. His entire life was driven by a mission. His idea of jihad was not about endless conquest for the sake of power. It was a sacred duty to defend the lands of Islam and to liberate its most holy sites. This gave his campaigns a moral and spiritual weight that inspired deep loyalty in his people. He wasn't just a king they served, he was a champion they believed in. Saladin became the embodiment of the ideal Muslim ruler, a leader whose piety was matched only by his strategic brilliance and profound sense of justice. His unwavering devotion to liberating Jerusalem resonated deeply, transforming him into a spiritual and military exemplar. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Saladin's legacy is the respect he earned even from his enemies. His name became synonymous with chivalry. You remember his actions at the fall of Jerusalem, the profound act of mercy that stood in such stark contrast to the brutality of the First Crusade. This was not a one-time event. Legends abound of his noble conduct. During the Third Crusade, it was said that when he heard his great rival, Richard the Lionheart, was sick with a fever, Saladin sent his own personal physicians to treat him, along with fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to cool him. Whether every detail of these stories is true doesn't matter. What matters is that people believed them. They fit the character of the man. Even in the heat of battle, Saladin's conduct was often marked by a remarkable chivalry. His magnanimous treatment of defeated foes, and his famous, often legendary, interactions with Richard the Lionheart, forged an enduring image of a noble warrior, respected even by those he fought. Ultimately, Saladin's greatest gift to his world was unity. Before him, the Islamic Middle East was a fractured landscape of squabbling princes and rival dynasties, unable to stand up to the Crusader threat. Saladin, through his tireless campaigning, his diplomacy, and the sheer force of his character, reminded them of what they had in common. He gave them a shared purpose, a single banner under which they could all stand. He proved that a united Islamic world could not be defeated. This legacy of unity and successful defense has echoed through the centuries. To this day, his name is invoked by leaders and movements across the Middle East who seek to inspire a sense of shared identity and purpose. Saladin's profound gift to the Islamic world was the rekindling of a shared sense of purpose. He forged unity from fragmentation, inspiring a generation to rally behind a common cause and solidifying a powerful sense of collective identity that would echo through the centuries. Saladin's legacy is one of enduring moral authority and inspirational leadership, a contrast to the raw, transformative power of Genghis Khan. Both men, in their own unique ways, shaped the course of nations and continents. But how do their distinct military doctrines, leadership styles, and philosophies of empire stand when placed side by side? Our next chapter draws a direct comparison between these two titans, exploring the fundamental differences that defined their monumental impacts. They never met, their paths separated by vast distances and the passage of time. Yet, Genghis Khan and Saladin stand as two of history's most compelling figures, each an unparalleled master of their craft. When we place their lives side by side, what profound lessons emerge from their contrasting approaches to leadership, warfare, and the very construction of empire. Let us examine the unique genius of these two extraordinary commanders. On the battlefield, they were both brilliant, but their brilliance took dramatically different forms. Genghis Khan's genius was one of speed, momentum, and terror. His army was a force of nature, a hurricane of horsemen that moved with unbelievable swiftness. He perfected the art of encirclement, of the feigned retreat, and he wielded psychological warfare like a sharpened blade, convincing his enemies they were defeated before the first arrow was even fired. When faced with walls, he adapted, learning siegecraft and turning his enemies' own technology against them. Saladin, on the other hand, was a master of the long game. His genius was one of strategic patience, of logistics, and of attrition. He knew the terrain of the Middle East intimately. He knew how to use the heat, the lack of water, and the vast distances to his advantage. He rarely rushed into a fight. He would chip away at his enemy, cut off their supplies, and force them to fight on his terms in a place of his choosing. He was a master of the siege, both in defending his own cities and in taking those of his enemies. The battlefield saw two distinct masters. Genghis Khan commanded an army of terrifying speed and adaptability, overwhelming foes with relentless momentum. Saladin, by contrast, waged a war of meticulous patience, outmaneuvering and outthinking his enemies, turning logistics and terrain into his greatest allies. Their styles of leadership were just as different. Genghis Khan ruled through absolute, unquestionable authority. His will was law. He forged loyalty through a combination of fear and unparalleled opportunity. If you betrayed him, you and your family would be destroyed. But if you were loyal and capable, no matter your background, you could rise to the highest levels of power and wealth. He built a true meritocracy, bound together by an iron discipline and a shared hunger for conquest. Saladin's authority came from a different source. He led by moral example. People followed him not because they feared him, but because they believed in him. His authority was rooted in his famous piety, his reputation for justice, and his unwavering commitment to a cause larger than himself. He inspired devotion through his humility and generosity. Where Genghis Khan united his people for the promise of worldly conquest, Saladin united his for the promise of spiritual and cultural defense. One ruled through an iron will, demanding absolute obedience, and forging loyalty through a mix of terror and opportunity. The other led by the compelling force of his moral character, inspiring devotion through piety, justice, and a shared spiritual vision. Their paths to command were fundamentally different. This led to two completely different ideas of what an empire should be. Genghis Khan's vision was limitless. He believed he had a divine mandate to conquer the entire world and bring all of humanity under a single, universal Mongol rule. His was a philosophy of perpetual expansion, of creating a globalized world connected by trade and ruled by his single, unbending law. Saladin's vision was, in contrast, one of consolidation and defense. He did not seek to conquer Europe or China. His goal was to unite the fractured Islamic world, to heal its divisions, and to defend it from outside threats. Specifically, the Crusaders. His was an empire of restoration, focused on reclaiming sacred lands and re-establishing a just, pious society within its traditional borders. Genghis Khan dreamed of a single, universal dominion, perpetually expanding outwards. Saladin, conversely, focused on consolidating and defending the fractured Islamic world, driven by a profound desire to protect and restore its sacred lands. Their imperial ambitions, while grand, sprang from vastly different motivations. The contrasting brilliance of Genghis Khan and Saladin offers a rich tapestry of historical insights. They were products of their times, yet their impacts transcended their immediate eras, shaping the world in profound and lasting ways. As we near the conclusion of our journey, let us delve into the enduring relevance of their stories and the timeless lessons they offer about leadership, faith, and the very nature of human ambition. Our penultimate chapter explores the enduring relevance of their lives. Centuries have passed since the thunder of Mongol hooves echoed across the steppes, and since the banner of Saladin was raised over Jerusalem. Yet, the figures of Genghis Khan and Saladin continue to captivate, to inspire, and to provoke debate in our modern world. Why do their stories resonate so powerfully today? And what timeless lessons can we draw from the lives of these two extraordinary titans? In the modern imagination, Genghis Khan often occupies a complex and contested space. On one hand, he is the ultimate conqueror, the very symbol of ruthless efficiency and unstoppable military might. His name is shorthand for a certain kind of raw, world-altering ambition. And yet, in recent decades, his legacy has been re-examined. We now see him as a surprising agent of globalization. The Pax Mongolica he initiated created a bridge between East and West, allowing for an unprecedented flow of goods, ideas, and technologies. He is a paradox, a destroyer of worlds who also, inadvertently, connected them. Genghis Khan remains a fascinating and often controversial figure. He embodies the raw power of ambition and military might, yet his empire also served as an unexpected bridge between civilizations, a testament to his paradoxical legacy as both a force of destruction and an architect of connection. Saladin's legacy, by contrast, often feels more universally heroic. His name has become a symbol of chivalry, justice, and the noble defense of one's faith and homeland. His appeal crosses cultural and religious lines. While he is a towering hero in the Islamic world, his story of mercy and integrity has also been told and retold with admiration in the West. In an age where we grapple with questions of interfaith relations and ethical conduct in war, Saladin's story remains incredibly relevant. His life offers a powerful example of a leader who could be a fierce and effective warrior without sacrificing his principles or his humanity. Saladin's appeal, however, often transcends historical boundaries. He stands as a universal ideal of chivalry, strategic wisdom, and profound faith. His story inspires not just within the Islamic world, but speaks to anyone who values justice, mercy, and principled leadership, even in the face of conflict. From their lives, we learn profound lessons about the very nature of power. They represent two fundamentally different forms of authority. Genghis Khan wielded coercive power. It was the power of the sword, of absolute command, of a system that rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal with terrifying finality, and it was devastatingly effective. Saladin, on the other hand, wielded inspirational power. It was the power of moral authority, of leading by example, of uniting people through a shared vision and a commitment to justice. Both men built empires, both changed the world. Their stories show us that power can be seized through force, but it can also be earned through character. From their lives, we learn profound lessons about the nature of power itself. One demonstrates the terrifying efficiency of absolute command, the other the enduring strength of moral authority. Their empires rose and fell, but the principles of leadership they embodied continue to be debated and studied. The stories of Genghis Khan and Saladin, though centuries old, continue to offer a powerful lens through which to view our own world, reminding us of the enduring complexities of human ambition and the profound impact of individual will. As we reach the final moments of our journey, let us offer one last reflection on the shared, yet distinct, legacies of these two titans of history. Our final chapter brings us to a thoughtful farewell. As the quiet of the night deepens, let us cast one last gaze upon the lives of Genghis Khan and Saladin. Though they never met, their destinies were, in a strange and profound way, intertwined. The forces they unleashed, the empires they built, and the ideals they embodied would ripple across continents and centuries, forever reshaping the human story. Their individual narratives converge to form a larger, compelling picture of a world in flux, a testament to the transformative power of extraordinary individuals. The world we inhabit today bears the unseen imprints of their influence. Genghis Khan, through sheer force of will, tore down the walls between nations. His vast, unified empire created a highway for ideas, technologies, and cultures to travel from the shores of China to the heart of Europe. He didn't mean to connect the world, he meant to conquer it, but in doing so, he created the largest single marketplace of goods and knowledge the planet had ever seen. Saladin, in his own way, also fostered a new kind of connection. In his determined defense of the Islamic world against the Crusades, he became the focal point of a sustained, intense, and deeply personal interaction between Christendom and Islam. It was a dialogue, often spoken through the clash of swords, but it was also a dialogue of chivalry, of diplomacy, and of a slow, grudging, mutual respect. Genghis Khan, through sheer conquest, forged connections across a vast continent, while Saladin, in his relentless defense, shaped the enduring dialogue between East and West, a dialogue sometimes of conflict, sometimes of profound respect. In the grand tapestry of history, they stand as complementary forces. Genghis Khan was the irresistible force of expansion, a human earthquake that redrew the map of the world. His was a vision that looked ever outward, seeking new horizons to conquer. Saladin was the immovable object. His was a vision that looked inward, seeking to consolidate, to purify, and to defend. He was the great unifier, the protector of a civilization under siege. They show us that history is pushed forward, not just by those who build new things, but also by those who fight to protect what they believe in. Their individual wills, so mighty and so distinct, collectively underscore the profound impact that singular leaders can have on the trajectory of nations and civilizations. Yet, as we drift towards the end of our story, it's important to remember the men beneath the legends. Beneath the title of Great Khan was Temujin, the abandoned boy who knew the sting of hunger and betrayal. A man driven by a fierce need to create an order that would never let another family be left to starve on the steppe. And beneath the title of Sultan was Yusuf, the quiet scholar who preferred books to battles, a man driven by a profound faith and a deep sense of duty to his people and his God. They were not simple heroes or villains. They were complex human beings, capable of both incredible acts of creation and terrifying acts of destruction, each guided by the powerful convictions of their age. Their stories remind us that history is not merely a sequence of events, but a deeply human drama, played out on the grandest stages. And so, as the veil of night settles over the modern world, the echoes of the Mongol thunder and the call to prayer from ancient minarets can still be heard if you listen closely. The tales of Genghis Khan and Saladin, two titans who shaped their world, continue to inspire awe, reflection, and a deeper understanding of the forces that have shaped our shared human story. Thank you so much for joining us on this long journey through history tonight. It has been a true pleasure to share these stories with you. If you've enjoyed this immersive experience, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. It helps us immensely in creating more content just like this. We hope we've been good company through your drive, your work, or your quiet hours of rest. Join us again for another journey into the past, as our nighttime explorations continue to illuminate the fascinating figures and pivotal moments that have shaped our world. Until then, may your rest be peaceful, and your curiosity ever awakened by the timeless narratives of history.